as I grew up, I knew a good number of African American young people and empathized with them. So it kind of evolved from my own internal kind of sense of what I thought was a necessity to move towards a more fair society. In 1964, I went to a conference at Columbia University for lawyers who may be interested in doing some legal work in the South. There were very few Southern lawyers who would commit themselves. For example, in Mississippi, there were 4 black lawyers licensed to practice. One was a member of a minor judiciary, so he was disqualified. So there were 3 black lawyers for 1 million black inhabitants in the state of Mississippi. So the need was great, and similarly throughout the other states. So I went to Columbia University to at least acquaint us with some of the laws of the state so we could be a little more functional. And at the end of it, this was on June 7th of 1964, at the end of it they said, this is what you can expect. You will be in a small southern town. Suddenly you'll hear a police siren. The police officer will pull you over. You're driving through the town. And you'll say, officer, what's the problem? And he could say, you didn't make a right-hand signal when you turned there. You'll say, but I did. He said, you didn't. You said, I did. He said, you didn't. Come with me. They will take you to the local jail. The sheriff will book you in. When it gets dark, the sheriff will authorize your release. He will notify the Ku Klux Klan or a similar violent organization, and you'll be apprehended by that group. That was on June 7th. On June 21st, the 3 civil rights workers, Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, were missing in Philadelphia, Mississippi after being placed in jail and then released. And when the country wondered what was their fate, 2 weeks before we'd been told what we could expect. So shortly after that, a week later, I was in Federal Judge Nealon's chambers on a case, and one of his staff members came in and said, Mr. Myers, you have a urgent call. And I got on the phone. The man said, my name is Bob Haling. I am president of the St. Augustine chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You know what's going on in St. Augustine? I said, yes, I know. He said, we need help here immediately. I said, how soon? He said, immediately. I said, fine. Now, St. Augustine, how did that happen? So Dr. King needed a win. His constituency was becoming unconvinced of the nonviolent approach. They wanted something to achieve. He went to Albany, Georgia, and struck out. He didn't go there. He then went to Atlanta, his hometown, and the people in Atlanta said, look, we are anxious to become a national city. We're going to do this on our own. So they turned him down. He then heard of St. Augustine, the oldest community in the United States, formed 1565, about to celebrate its 400th anniversary. And he sent some people down there. They came back and said, here, this tourist town of St. Augustine is totally segregated. So he thought he could have a quick win. He was on his way to Selma that year, but didn't get to Selma until the following year. He thought he could integrate St. Augustine because of its tourism and the forces met, resistance met there. And it was unknown until a woman by the name of Mrs. Malcolm Peabody, who was the wife of the Episcopal Bishop of Massachusetts and the mother of the then governor of Massachusetts, Endicott Chubb Peabody, an All-American football player at Harvard. She went down with, marched with Dr. King, was arrested and jailed, and that gave it the national attention that it needed. So I went down, and my principal role there was to do what's called removal. Remove the cases, because there were hundreds of people who were arrested, remove them from the state court to the federal court, where you had a reasonable federal judge who would get a fair hearing. So we had to take all these hundreds of cases and seek to have them removed, which we did. We were successful to some extent, and when I left, the person who succeeded me, the lawyer, was hit over the head with a lead pipe. And they went back to segregation until finally, months later, the business community said, we're collapsing, we have to stop this. And St. Augustine became an integrated community. I sat with all of King's principals in St. Augustine, because he sent them all down there. Andy Young, who later became the mayor of Atlanta, the ambassador to the UN, Congressman, Hosea Williams, C.T. Vivian, all of these were the leaders. And to be honest, I felt totally inadequate when they would turn to me and say, what do you think? Because I was really the only white voice in this, all the strategy discussions at the time. So that was 64 in St. Augustine. 65, I was in Mississippi. And at that time, when you crossed the border in Mississippi, you felt you left the continental United States. When you were in St. Augustine, in Florida, you always felt there was a place you could go to Jacksonville. You could even get to Miami, Tallahassee. There were towns. When you were in Mississippi, you felt you were, you were outside of any kind of prospect of help.
So did you feel like you were in?
You had danger, yeah. The reason you had danger was, one of the reasons, if you would go out outside of Jackson, the state capital, into the rural areas, and you had a rented car, the license plates in Mississippi were by the county. So if you were out in a rural area and they saw from, I think it was Hinds County, H-I-N-D-S, I think it's the county of Jackson, if they saw, they stopped you, and as soon as you opened your mouth, they knew who you were and why you were there. Yeah. In St. Augustine, I was there on July 2nd, 1964. Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Law, and we were just enthralled. I mean, and then we heard that a young African-American boy went into a white barbershop and got a haircut in Kansas City, and we were just exhilarated. However, it was so tense in St. Augustine, and there was a big Klan rally scheduled for July 4th, that we decided to defer testing the law until after the July 4th rally. Testing meant sending people into restaurants, sending people into motels, and the most feared thing, sending somebody into a movie theater. because you're in a dark area, you're going to get hit over the head. So that was one of the big strategy things that I called, even though there was so much pressure and enthusiasm to integrate promptly, we deferred it for several days. Well, my feeling was that a lot had been achieved in the law. And I say the law is essentially the landing force on the beach, that the struggle for true economic, cultural, political, social equality still had to take place outside the framework of the law. And I'm still saying the same thing today. Yeah. Well, I think this first. People ask me, how did you dare to go do this? You were the father of 2 little kids. You had a wife. Why did you do that? Of course, my wife was fully supportive of my decision, and I said, mostly I did it for me. I had the opportunity to be involved in the passion of the day and make some small contribution to the most serious problem that this country faced, and I could not refuse to go. So I did that.